release of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, we have the final installment of Phase 4 of the MCU. So today we're going to stop and rank all 40 installments of the MCU, movies, TV shows, specials, from the worst to the best. In last place, She-Hulk Attorney at Law. Now, a legal sitcom about a woman's love life set in the MCU was probably never going to be my cup of tea, but also a bunch of the choices they made here were just kind of bizarre.
He almost tasted that. Num 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 num, eat it up.
Are you kidding me?
Now, don't get me wrong, I had some fun with it, and the lead actress is super charming, but from the very beginning, it was very obvious that they were more interested in making a point than telling a compelling story. And by the time the season came to a close, and based off multiple interviews with the creators, it was really obvious that they didn't design the show to appeal to as broad of an audience as possible, but instead, they designed the show to troll their potential trolls.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
And after the season finished airing, one of the directors said that they wanted the show to be a sex-positive show for children. What? Number 39, Thor: The Dark World. And this is the MCU at its most mediocre. The shots are in focus, the special effects are polished, the movie stars are charming. It doesn't do anything to overtly embarrass itself. It just doesn't work.
Some things should work, but do they?
It tries 5 different genres, but doesn't pick one to do well. The story is simple, yet still somehow confusing. Malekith is only memorable for how forgettable he is as a villain, and he's not given a single defining character or personality trait. So in the end, the movie just doesn't do anything interesting at all. It's just mediocre. Number 38, Eternals. Fresh off winning Oscars for Best Director and Picture for Nomadland, Chloe Zhao brought us one of the most ambitious, gorgeous, and polarizing films in the entire MCU. For many of you, it's a gorgeous look at broken heroes with a rich mythology. For me, it's a movie with too many characters, too many plot lines, too many philosophical ideas for one movie, and it just collapses under the weight of all of its ambitions. If you loved the movie, cool, but...
Well, agree to disagree.
Honestly, I really do appreciate that they took a risk and tried something different with this movie. I'm okay with risks like this. But did it work for me? Did it pay off?
Not a chance. Not this time.
Next up, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, this should have been an easy win for the MCU. It's MCU plus buddy cop formula plus 2 likable side characters finally getting to be front and center. What could go wrong? Apparently a lot. Now, I get what they were going for with all the messaging, but it's not actually saying anything interesting or giving a new perspective. It's just a bunch of heavy-handed moments and outright lecturing.
You've got to do better, Senator. You've got to step up.
The show is so interested in making the villain sympathetic that it forgets a villain is supposed to pose a credible threat, and there's far too many unlikely alliances to be believable. In the end, the big win here, Zemo's dance moves. Number 36, Thor: Love and Thunder. Now, this is a movie that feels like it has so much potential for greatness, and then sabotages itself with a tone so goofy that it plays like self-parody. On the one hand, it tackles the philosophical problem of evil, love, and death. And on the other hand, it has screaming goats. And Van Damme's split kicks. Here I am! And then there's Christian Bale.
It's time for another good idea, bad idea. Good idea.
Hiring Oscar-winning dramatic actor Christian Bale to play your villain.
Bad idea.
Putting Oscar-winning dramatic actor Christian Bale in your goofiest movie. This is the worst example in the MCU of a movie with all the ingredients to be great that just drowns it out with too much comedy. Real quick, while I'm talking, be sure to join me down below in the comments section. If you're up for the challenge, share your ranking of the entire MCU from the worst to the best. Then we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now I know by putting this movie this low on the list, some of you are thinking,
this is pretty much the worst video ever made.
Of all the opinions I've shared on this channel, this is the opinion that has stepped on the most toes. But I gotta stick to my guns.
I understood that reference.
The fresh humor from the first film here feels forced and mean-spirited. The tone jumps from Looney Tunes humor to patricide in a heartbeat.
Are you not entertained?
And by delaying the reveal of Ego as a villain, it removes any sense of urgency or stakes until the final battle begins. I really wanted to love this movie. It was one of my most anticipated movies of 2017, but in the end, it just broke my heart.
You're breaking my heart.
Number 34, Captain Marvel, a highly uneven film that does have some entertainment value. It's at its best when it's focused in on a young, less cynical Nick Fury, and during the investigation, it kind of had a little bit of an X-Files vibe at times for me, and that was kind of cool. But the movie just doesn't know what to do with its lead character. She's not written to be particularly warm and likable.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
But the movie struggles to know what to do with the lead character. She's not written to be like warm and likable. And from there, she's already incredibly powerful at the beginning of the movie. She's just given amnesia and people are telling her what to do. So she doesn't have like a character arc in the traditional sense, and you can't really connect with her. So it's entertaining enough, but that's about it. 33, Iron Man 2. After the wild success of the first Iron Man film, Marvel Studios very quickly greenlit an Iron Man 2 and announced a release date just 2 years in the future because they were prepping up to do an Avengers film, despite Jon Favreau, the director, saying they needed more time to get the script right.
Not a great plan.
The end result is a film with a great cast, but a totally unfocused script. Every single scene for the first 30 minutes introduces a new plot line, and because there's so many plot lines, none of them get properly developed, and there's surprisingly few action sequences in this film. This is a perfect example of a great team working with a bad script. That'll bring us to I Am Groot, a series of charming, cute, and unassuming shorts. Each short introduces a simple little anecdote that puts a grin on your face, and there's some nice guest appearances throughout. All that said, this is also a series that feels like it was created simply to put more content on Disney+. They're fine. They do their job of putting a grin on my face, and that's about it. Now, a bunch of people have told me that I should have included this series in this ranking. Okay, don't include it in your ranking down below in the comments if you don't want it included. Fair enough.
I don't care.
Number 31, Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I know a number of you see this placement and want to scream,
How dare you!
But to me, this is a superficially entertaining film that absolutely falls apart on a story level. The basic plot here is that Tony Stark left his extremely dangerous glasses to a high schooler who'd been dead for 5 years without any instructions.
That's a weird story.
Also, for the 7th time in the MCU, a villain is motivated by scorn for Tony Stark.
Hit me, baby, one more time.
Sure, it's kind of fun, but at the cost of all credibility. We'll enter the top 30 with Moon Knight, and I'm so disappointed that this series is this low on the list. I was so excited to check out Moon Knight, and it turned out to be one of the most frustrating of the Disney Plus shows for me. Because it kicks off, and it's an interesting change of pace for the MCU, and there's a great actor playing an interesting character, built some nice intrigue, and then it just kind of meandered in the middle, and by the end it felt rushed.
And you blew it! You blew it!
It seemed like every episode changed genres, and as it went along, it got weirder in a bad way and less interesting. So when you get to the final 2 episodes, we're in a psych ward and in a boat in the afterlife, and then we return to Egypt to have a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers fight in front of the Great Pyramids?
Go, go, Power Rangers!
And there's not a lot of Moon Knight in Moon Knight. So I wanted to love this show so much. But by the end, I kind of lost interest. Number 29, Incredible Hulk. This has always been a bit of an oddity in the MCU since it's the only film where Edward Norton played Bruce Banner the Hulk and the only MCU film which was distributed by Universal. So it just kind of has a different feel and vibe to it than the rest of the MCU. But I always felt like this movie was more enjoyable than people give it credit for, and I've never thought this was like a bottom tier or bad film. I like that it's a little bit more mature and less jokey. The Hulk action sequences are exciting and unique, but the story here is a little bit clunky and certain plot lines are introduced and kind of abandoned. That's probably because the movie was reworked in editing and they had to cut a whole bunch of stuff out. But in the end, it might not be a smash hit, but it's not an abomination either. That'll bring us to Thor, and like many films in Phase 1, it absolutely nails the casting, but you can also feel the MCU trying to find its footing. Branagh brings this great sense of Shakespearean grandeur to Asgard, but then there's this really jarring tonal shift when you get to the Earth, and suddenly it's a fish out of water comedy.
What?
Also, because the central conflict is about Thor's battle with his own ego, it has emotional weight, but it lacks a sense of urgency. So the story itself never feels as big or as important as the world in which it takes place. So it's pretty good, but it never quite makes you go,
I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
Number 27, Avengers Age of Ultron, and here the MCU goes for a bigger is better strategy. So there's more characters, more plot lines, more quips, but there's also a sense of diminishing returns by simply adding more. The individual moments can be just as good as they were in the first film, but where the movie struggles is in the story, in the storytelling. The movie flies through plot points so quickly that it frequently forgets to explain what's going on as it's happening, so it's frequently unclear exactly what people are doing and why. This feels like a perfect example of someone cooking with premium ingredients, but only delivering a good meal. It's still enjoyable, but very disappointing and not as good as it should be. Number 26, Doctor Strange. Without question, for me, this is the MCU film with the coolest visuals. It's a little bit like Feige and Derrickson threw Inception, Dark City, Escher drawings, and Harry Potter into a blender and just delivered these spellbinding sorcerer battles. The images you're seeing are inherently violations of the laws of physics and nature as we understand them. Kind of like a Fast and the Furious movie.
I don't want to die!
Okay, maybe it's nothing like that. But as awesome as the visuals and world building are, it suffers from the classic MCU problem of feeling formulaic and casting a great actor to play a forgettable villain. Next up, Iron Man 3, another oddity in the MCU. The film feels like it's designed to close out Tony Stark's arc, and I'm pretty sure that's because they weren't sure at that point in time if Robert Downey Jr. was going to stick around. Well, he did stick around for 6 more years, in which case they kind of abandon a whole bunch of plot points in this movie by the time we get to Avengers Age of Ultron. And of course, there's the Mandarin twist, which was so poorly received that they had to retcon it when we get to Shang-Chi.
So I made a decision and it was wrong. It was a bad call, Ripley.
All that said, I think the movie works as a subversive Shane Black action film. His dialogue works great with Robert Downey Jr. and Tony Stark's sense of humor. There's some cool action sequences, so if you can forgive the Mandarin twist, I feel like this is a pretty enjoyable film. Number 24, Black Widow, the long-lost Phase 3 movie that came out 5 years too late after the title character had already died, and it was a prequel designed to kick off Phase 4.
Wow, that was weird.
Weird timing aside, the movie worked for me as a spy film set in the MCU. The stakes are more personal than epic, there's some nice themes about family, and it established Florence Pugh as the future of the MCU.
This thing that you do when you whip your hair when you're fighting.
It's a fighting pose. You're a total poser.
I'm not a poser.
Now, Taskmaster turned out to be a total dud, and the third act goes cartoonishly over the top in a movie that otherwise is pretty grounded for the MCU. There's definitely issues here.
I liked it.
23, Miss Marvel. Now, the trailers for this one didn't really do anything for me, but I actually really enjoyed the first 2 episodes. They were very highly stylized with a bunch of visual onomatopoeia, kind of drew me into her world and had a bunch of endearing characters. But then in the middle of the season, it goes down this weird rabbit trail where it kind of loses the plot, and suddenly we're globe-trotting. There's a flashback to the 1940s where it becomes an adult drama for 20 minutes.
Why?
And then in the finale, we returned to having fun with Kamala Khan and her community. So when the show focused in on Kamala Khan, her friends, her family, and her community, I really dug it. Then we have What If, and this is always a tough one for me to place because on the one hand, it's inherently inconsequential to the main MCU timeline because we're just watching these scenarios unfold. On the other hand, I really enjoy watching these scenarios unfold, in particular the way that it has the one change that's set up for the episode, but then you see the trickle down of all the other consequences that happen because of that, and in particular, the Doctor Strange episode was just so gut-wrenching and revealed so much about him. Also, due to the nature of this show, it is a little bit more hit or miss, but when it hit for me, it really hit. Number 21, Loki. This is a show I went into extremely skeptical because I wasn't crazy about the idea of basing a show off a character they'd already killed off. But the show itself won me over. It's another highly unique experience in the MCU. It's more of like a crime procedural with a bunch of twists, turns, and variants, but the real standout here is the actual dialogue between Loki and Mobius, where it's a lot more poignant and philosophical than I was expecting. Now, this is also a show where I really enjoyed the ride of watching it, but it's not one that I ever think about going to rewatch. We've made it to the top 20 with WandaVision, and this is easily one of the weirdest entries in the MCU. It blends sitcoms, The Twilight Zone, with the MCU while telling this highly emotional story about grief.
I can't feel you.
And during the middle of this season, it was just fantastic at building intrigue. Unfortunately, it wasn't nearly as good at paying off that intrigue.
You're Ralph Boner?
Boner. And I thought my jokes were bad.
Likewise, the finale turned into another generic MCU boss fight with CGI characters punching each other in the face while flying, and it failed to properly address the fact that Wanda took a city hostage for weeks and tortured the people.
Because that's what heroes do.
This one is so frustrating for me because the highs are so high and the lows are so low.
Missed it by that much.
Number 19, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Coming off Infinity War, instead of continuing that story, it decides to tell an independent ant story, which cranks up the fun antics instead of upping the ant-e. Evangeline Lilly as the Wasp adds some sting to the mix, and of course we get more Paul Rudd. Some could argue that the villains don't pose an important threat, but that's what I find charming about the film. It's a simple MacGuffin story about a bunch of groups swarming on a piece of technology. Also, it sets up one of the great character arcs of the entire MCU.
How'd you do it, Scott? The card trick?
Sir.
Can you knock?
James E. Woo, FBI.
It isn't trying to be a brilliant film, but it is a pleasant one. 18, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. As someone that's been a Sam Raimi fan for over 25 years, I love that we got some weird, quirky Sam Raimi in the MCU, and not Spider-Man Sam Raimi, Evil Dead 2 Sam Raimi.
Groovy.
Likewise, I love that we got an MCU film with enough horror elements to freak out my wife. Like literally when we saw this in the theater, she didn't watch the last 20 minutes of the movie. But it's also a movie that never really lives up to the promise of the title. If you're gonna call your movie Multiverse of Madness, you probably should have more multiverse madness than pizza balls and go on red, stop on green. Likewise, while there's a number of sequences with some Raimi-isms, the movie as a whole feels like it was directed by a generic MCU committee. I know many of you weren't crazy about this film, but
I liked it.
Number 17, Hawkeye. This street-level series might have the smallest stakes of any entry on this list besides, like, I Am Groot, but it worked for me because it delivers a set of characters that you actually want to spend time with. Finally, Hawkeye gets to be front and center, and it deals with the ramifications of his time as Ronin. But the other standouts here were Kate Bishop and Yelena. Both of them have this infectious charm that makes you want to see more of them. This is the Marvel Disney Plus show that felt the most like an actual TV show, and for me, that's very much a good thing. Then we have Ant-Man, the MCU heist film, a movie that might have the smallest stakes of any film on this list, but the movie uses that to its advantage, frequently, literally. The movie is brought to life by the exuberant cast.
Ants. Ants. Ant-Man.
And we get some elegant legacy actors in Michael Douglas and Michelle Pfeiffer. Now, the plot may not be fantastic. It's similar to Iron Man and the stakes are far from giant. It may not be fancy, but it is unassuming fun and established Ant-Man as a permanent member of the MCU. People have been asking me to stop with the ant puns, but I can't. Actually really difficult to do that many ant puns in a row. Took a lot of takes. Number 15, Werewolf by Night. This was a refreshing change of pace for the MCU and an experiment that worked for me. It's a simple, straightforward, standalone story where the director was given creative control to do something different. The end result is a throwback monster movie with real sets, lots of practical effects, actual gore, and a campy tone that fits the story. It might not have the flashiest set pieces or the biggest emotions, but it's a change of pace that you'll want to wolf down. Number 14, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, another solid entry in the franchise, this one delivering some of the best fights in the MCU. They highlight a variety of different styles from Asian martial arts films. But the glue holding it together is our main villain here, who's complicated, he's misguided, but he's driven by love. Unfortunately, it's held back a little bit by the MCU-isms. There's an over-reliance on spectacle, some misplaced humor, and too many references to the MCU that just didn't need to be there. It's very good, not quite great.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
That brings us to Captain America, the First Avenger. I love the first hour of this movie. There's this deep sense of classic values and nobility. The production design and score are top notch, and Steve Rogers' sense of heroism is just inspiring, and they got the perfect Captain America in Chris Evans. But whenever it cuts to Red Skull, the story slows to a crawl. There's no sense of urgent danger, and the movie montages through World War II. So as much as I love the origin story of Steve Rogers, the story itself is a little bit uneven. At number 12, Thor Ragnarok. Coming off the epically mediocre Thor the Dark World, Taika Waititi injected this film with a double dose of humor and energy. From the new characters to the color scheme to the score, this movie oozes fun. Also, it highlights Chris Hemsworth's impeccable comedic timing. And because the movie's so funny, it's easy to forget it actually packs an emotional punch. Unfortunately, it doesn't always know when to stop, and a few too many times it cuts the dramatic tension with an inappropriately placed joke, and the treatment of the Warriors 3 is just inexcusable. Oops! But at the end of the day, this is a thoroughly entertaining film. Coming in at number 11, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Of all the films in the MCU, no film was dealt a worse hand than this one. The lead of the franchise died well into the development process, and production took place during a global pandemic. but despite all the real-world setbacks, they delivered one of the best entries of Phase 4. The movie comes off like the organic continuation of the first film, and the death of Chadwick Boseman amplifies the story that was already there because it just adds so much emotion and conflict and tension into each sequence in every single performance. The movie's held back a little bit by the fact that it's too long, it's a little bit overstuffed, it's kind of muddled in the middle act. But after a very uneven Phase 4, it ends things on a high note and it honors the legacy of Chadwick Boseman. We've made it to the top 10 with Black Panther, and this is one of the most thematically rich films in the MCU. Most movies in the franchise are unassuming escapism. This is a movie that had something it wanted to say, and it told it through its story. The secret sauce here is Killmonger, who's a villain who absolutely needs to be defeated and stopped, but he wins a moral victory and is able to sway T'Challa and Wakanda by the end of the film. Now, on the flip side, the action, CGI, and third act are surprisingly bland, but overall, this is one of the most mature films in the MCU, while still making room for war rhinos and sneaker puns, which are pretty punny. Number 9, Spider-Man Homecoming. After a decade of Spider-Man doing this,
Now take all this.
and fighting this, Spidey joins the MCU with an absolutely charming cast and lighthearted tone. One of the cool things here is it gives a high schooler's perspective on the MCU, and it gives Tony Stark a new role as a mentor. Now, I think the movie works better as a high school film and an MCU movie than it does as a pure Spider-Man story, because it kind of avoids the classic Spider-Man imagery that we saw in the previous films. For me, this is one of the most rewatchable films in the entire MCU. Next up, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Once again, the MCU demonstrates just how versatile it is by telling a story that's a little bit more mature, that adds in some politics and conspiracy theories, all while delivering the fun that you expect from these movies. The action is visceral and exciting, and it makes the MCU feel like a lived-in world. Now, I don't have a ton of specific critiques of the film besides the Zola exposition dump and the MCU's inability to let characters actually die. I know a ton of you have this one at the very top, and it's very good. I've just never had it all the way up there. Number 7, Spider-Man: No Way Home. The second half of this film are so satisfying and enjoyable, it's easy to forget that the setup is pretty lazy.
Brilliant, but lazy.
This movie was just such a gift to Spider-Man fans. In fact, really, I think of it as an experience for Spider-Man fans more so than as an MCU film. I mean, for many of us, this movie was one of the best experiences we've ever had in a theater.
It was so crazy in there, like literally like everyone was standing up and screaming.
I know, my voice is gone. I was clapping, screaming.
There's a bunch of parts where people are like, whoa!
And while it is incredible fan service, it also carries a lot of emotional weight. It gives Tom Holland a compelling and emotional arc that comes to a satisfying conclusion. This is a great example of a movie that delivers everything that the audience wants, that's consistently entertaining, while still being built on a bit of a flimsy setup. Then we have The Avengers, the movie that finally cracked the code for how to do massive team-up movies, and they did it so successfully that for the last decade, every movie studio has been trying to copy the formula of this film. Whedon wisely streamlined the story to provide lots of opportunities for action set pieces and interaction between the characters. To this day, I still think this is some of the most fun banter between our Avengers that we've ever gotten. Likewise, it just delivers a crowd-pleasing, straightforward third act where each and every character gets their moment in the spotlight that just puts a big, gigantic grin on your face. Since the release of this movie, we've gotten plenty of other team-up movies that have gotten bigger and more extravagant, but there's still something special about what they were able to do with this film. Before I give you my top 5, remember to join me down below in the comments section. If you're up for the challenge, share your ranking of the entire MCU. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I've done a ton of other MCU content. I've ranked the heroes, the villains, the final battles, the post-credit scenes, the Stan Lee cameos, and so much more. If you enjoyed this video, you can find more like it in this playlist right up here. It's somewhere up there. Check it out when the video's over with. In 5th place, Guardians of the Galaxy. I thought Kevin Feige had lost his mind when he announced this project in summer 2012 after Avengers. And then I saw the movie and realized,
you are great.
Here, James Gunn took the MCU's biggest risk up to that point in time and just poured his heart and soul into it and crafted these broken characters that you fall in love with instantly.
What a bunch of a-holes.
It's so funny, but it's also heartfelt. The characters are great on their own, but they're even better together. It's so effective at getting you to care about these characters that it's able to pull off a line as sappy as, "We are Groot." This is honestly one of the biggest surprises I've ever had in a theater. In 4th place, Captain America: Civil War. Perhaps the ultimate example of the MCU's long-form, complex, interwoven storytelling, because it tells its own story while setting up Black Panther and being a follow-up to both Captain America: The Winter Soldier as well as Age of Ultron. The story manages to create a believable scenario where our heroes' different backgrounds and competing values would divide our Avengers. And here we are 6 years later, and people are still arguing about who was right. In fact, let's continue that argument down below in the comment section. Are you Team Cap or Team Iron Man? And the cherry on top is the airport sequence, which is just a dream come true for comic book fans. It's got action, it's got humor, it's got drama. This is another W for the Russos. In 3rd place, Iron Man. Compared to what the MCU has turned into, this movie feels quite quaint and restrained by comparison. Without the weight of the rest of the MCU on its shoulders, it can just focus in on telling a great story. At its core is a classic hero's journey, where an unlikely protagonist goes into a literal cave, is brought back to life, and starts a redemptive journey that's ultimately paid off in Endgame.
You're gonna kill yourself, Tony. I'm not gonna be a part of it.
I shouldn't be alive, unless it was for a reason. I just finally know what I have to do.
The real magic here is Robert Downey Jr., who is just effortlessly charismatic and has amazing chemistry with everyone. Doesn't have all the bells and whistles of later MCU films. That's precisely why it stands out. It's all about the story and characters. Our runner-up, Avengers: Endgame. The conclusion to the Infinity Saga can truly and appropriately be called epic. Because of where Infinity War left things, we're able to explore new things about our Avengers by seeing how each of them responds to tragedy. And as the payoff to 3 phases worth of character development and story arcs, everything feels earned. And of course, it delivers one of the absolute best third acts of all time. Now, when I first watched the movie, I was pretty bothered by the big Thor Bowski. Here I am!
And now, looking back on it, I just remember the good stuff.
In the end, it's a marvelous and satisfying conclusion. But coming in at number 1, Avengers: Infinity War. After 10 years of teases and build-up, the movie absolutely lived up to the hype.
He's the best. I love it.
As a blockbuster, it delivers laughs, big emotions, epic action sequences, and a truly shocking finale. And it's also just fun seeing all of these characters interacting with one another.
I'm Peter, by the way.
Doctor Strange.
Oh, you're using your made-up names. I'm Spider-Man then.
But the thing that elevates the movie is Thanos. The film actually takes the time to make him multi-dimensional. and he's actually kind of sympathetic while also being a monster that you want to see defeated. This movie has everything that I want from a comic book movie, and the MCU specifically, so it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, remember to click on that playlist right over there. You can check out my ranking of the final battles, post-credit scenes, Stan Lee cameos, heroes, villains, and so much more. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much. Bye-bye.